retirement, I kind of went back to a passion of mine about history and matters to do with peace. And when I heard about this project, about the Welsh Women's Peace Petition of 1923-1924, I thought, great, there's a chance to do something worthwhile in terms of working with partners, that's all the logos that's up there, to really bring this story to the fore, because it's a piece of lost history. So I'm going to share some of that history with you, and there are lots of different aspects that I could talk about, so there may be questions you'll have then, and comments. Being as we're a small group, we can just interact, if that's all right. So that's a little bit about me. The partners in this project have really been the Welsh Peace Academy. We're one of the only UK nation to have a Peace Academy, so we're very glad of that. And that's based really out of a building called the Temple of Peace. I don't know if you've ever visited, which is in Cardiff, and it was built as a memorial to the fallen in the 2 world wars, really. And then there's the National Library. I'm sure you've been along there. And there are other partners like the Women's Archive, Wales, etc. So, 100 years ago. So, we've been showing this photo a lot, really, and it's been kind of uncovered over the last year or so. These are 4 women who went 100 years ago in the February of 1924 to present what we'd call a petition for peace, and they called it the Appeal for Peace, from the women of Wales to the women of America. That was their great idea, and I'll talk a bit about how they came to that idea and what exactly did they do. So in the February, these 4 women, as I said, were in New York and met with literally thousands of women from the peace movement and from suffrage movements in America. Who were they? Because it's been a kind of an exploration to kind of identify them, to be honest with you. So the tall lady in the middle is of interest to us here in this area because she actually was born and raised in Llanafan, which is a small village, nearby, isn't it? And on the way to Tregaron and so forth. And she was called Annie Jane Hughes Griffiths by the time that she led this deputation, but she was born in a house called Courtmawr in Llanafan, and to a large family, and she was Annie Davis at birth. And they were a family of landowners, so they had wealth and well-to-do and so forth. But she led this deputation, and she was a public figure in Wales at that time in the early 20s and after the First World War. So that's Annie, and I'll show a few other pictures about her. Then with that rather dubious kind of white fur around her shoulders there, that's Lynette Priest. And she was the youngest member of the delegation. She was a very interesting person who, again, local connections in that her father was the principal of the Theological College in Aberystwyth. So, that building that has got all the being done up and so forth at the beginning of the old college. He was the principal there. But in her own right, in fairness, she supported refugees at the end of the First World War in Romania. She belonged to the women's Christian student movement, and she eventually emigrated to America and became an eminent psychologist and belonged to the Quaker circle. So those are those 2. And then there's Mary Ellis, who's holding the bag. She was actually from a town in North Wales called Dolgellau, for those of you know where Dolgellau is, to the north of Machynlleth. And she was only the 2nd woman to be a schools inspector in Wales. And then the lady on the far next to Mary, we don't know a lot about her. There's always somebody who, in fairness, kind of seems to have gone along for the trip. So she lived near Annie, because Annie was living in London at this time, and I'll explain why in a moment. So Gladys Thomas was like a neighbour really of Annie and went along to keep company. And these were the women who actually took the peace petition and the appeal to America. So, a little bit about Annie, as I said, because she comes from Llanafan. So a few photos of her at different stages in her life. She initially was married to Tom Ellis, who became the Liberal MP from Meirionnydd. But he died while she was pregnant with her son, T. Ellis. She called him Tom Ellis as well, as a son. So he never knew his father, And she brought him up as a single parent, although, you know, with a lot of obviously well-to-do, as I said. But there's a photo of her standing with her son. And that's Cwrt actually, that's the house in Llanafan. And now I think it's a place where you can go on holiday and spend an awful lot of money, I think. Like a done-up place, very nice actually. But she, by this time, hence the Griffiths, so she'd been Davis at birth, was Ellis, then married to the MP. And by the time she took that delegation, she had married a minister in Charing Cross in London, hence why she was living in London. And because obviously there were Welsh chapels in those times in different cities and towns in England, and certainly in London. And so she was married to Peter Hughes Griffiths. And part of this exploration, you know, was obviously women were very commonly known by their married name, weren't they? So we just had this name, Mrs. Hughes Griffiths. We didn't even have her first name. So it's been a kind of a discovery about who these women were. So I'm going to just take you a little bit about the trip to America, simply because, well, it's quite extraordinary in a way, and it kind of takes us to you know, where they took the petition. But we also know a lot about the trip by now, because another discovery in this research was that little book, notebook, inconspicuous. She kept a diary basically of the kind of 6 weeks that they spent in America. Of course, in those days you went on a steamship, so they went from Euston Station in London to Liverpool to get the steamship to sail to New York. I think that took about a week. And then they travelled across America, basically, taking this message with them. And, you know, had a lovely send-off with daffodils and so forth in Euston. And had the support of many important people in their day. But it really was a women's movement, and a bit more about that in a minute. So what did they do? What was this achievement that we've all been so stunned by? Well, basically, they managed to collect 390,296 signatures on this appeal for peace, which is quite amazing, isn't it, really? You know, 100 years ago, you'd be pushed to get that amount. Now, with all our internet petitions and how easy it is to sign. And these women literally went from door to door in all the communities across Wales. So we're talking about towns, but we're talking about areas like this. I'll show you some local examples now. You know, the farms and so forth, and they walked, obviously. So alongside these four very kind of impressive women, you know, who had a lot of means, there were literally thousands of women ordinary women, of all persuasions, all backgrounds, all political parties certainly, who after the First World War, of course, had been deeply affected by all of the losses. And so this was about an appeal from women of one nation, a small nation, to the women of big nations, America. And there was a particular reason for that they decided on it, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So they took with them petition papers with all these signatures. Women were signing their names and address. In this, there's a little picture there, a graphic of literally a huge wooden chest that was designed especially to take the papers with them in the hold of the steamship to America. And they also had this leather-bound appeal kind of cover where not all the petition papers, but the wording of the appeal. And in Welsh it was called an appeal, which is literally the appeal. And then in English, the memorial, which was of course the memorial to the fallen in the First World War. We'll have a look at the wording now. But really, when this whole kind of history came to the fore again, which was only really in the last kind of 8 years, it was the discovery of that cover. One copy went to America and one copy stayed in Wales, and it was the discovery of that in the archives of this Temple of Peace in Cardiff that kind of got the ball rolling about what is this exactly, what is this women, what was this appeal for peace from the women of Wales to the women of the United States of America, 1923, 1924. So yeah, as I said, a little bit of a journey. I've never been to the United States, but you know, they in those times, 100 years ago, came off the steamship and had a big dinner reception of literally thousands of kind of gatherings a gathering with thousands of women in receptions, and there was a big one in a hotel called the Biltmore, which doesn't exist anymore, but in New York. Representatives of the different women's peace movement and suffrage movements and so forth. Harriet Laidlaw was one of the organisers. So they made connections and brought women together to present the petition to them, and had a lot of support really, and a good reception. They did meet with the President of the United States of the day, Calvin Coolidge, in the White House towards the end of February. But it wasn't to meet him, it wasn't to him that they were giving the petition. It was to the women's organisations, and they got, reports in the press in America as in Wales as well. And then they went on this journey right across the States, speaking with women's organisations of all kinds really. Obviously a lot of people had emigrated from Wales to America, so there were connections to build on, but really they were meeting, as I said, with various women's organisations and talking about this appeal for peace and gathering support. So they went from one end, New York, right over to California and back basically. So, weeks and weeks of this amazing journey, and the journal covers that and what they saw and who they met. So the idea of it, why have an appeal for peace from the women of Wales to the women of America? Well, basically it was all about the League of Nations, which was the forerunner of what we have now, the United Nations. For those of you who remember any of kind of that history of the period, the League of Nations was established after the end of the First World War in the Treaty of Versailles as a way of trying to get countries to resolve issues through court and through law rather than through conflict. So in Wales, there was a union that was established to support the aims and the work of the League of Nations. And very early days then, in 1923, because it was around this time that it was formed. So it was in the conference, which was held in Aberystwyth, that they decided in the Whitsun that they would have this appeal for peace. As the newspaper clipping says, women delegates attending the Welsh League of Nations Union Conference at Aberystwyth decided to organise a memorial signed by women in every Welsh village and town to be sent to the women of America, appealing for their support in putting an end for all time to war. That was their tremendous, plea, wasn't it, and their vision, and we can understand why fully with all the losses, as I said, of the First World War. And the reason was because America was refusing to join, wasn't agreeing to join the League of Nations, that's what it was about, or to join the International Court. And indeed they didn't join until after the Second World War, but that was the aim of it. And, in fairness to men, it was Gwilym Davies who was the organiser, the first organiser of the Welsh Union. It was very much kind of an idea that he had, how they could promote this kind of call, if you like. And the idea that women should do it, women who at this time, not very many women had the vote. So it was something that would come, not from any particular political party or people with that kind of power on the table, so a very different kind of idea then. And this was the person who established, I don't know if you've heard of, every year the youth of Wales transmit a message to the youth of all the kind of countries in loads of different languages of the world, the peace and goodwill message. And that was his idea as well, because this was the start of radio, so it was recorded on the radio to start. And the Urdd organisation have taken that forward every year. So he was behind that, and this was another one of his ideas that he worked with Annie and the others to bring to the fore. So that was kind of the start of it. So they decide this in the May, and by the beginning of February, they were on that steamship with a petition, as I said, with nearly 400,000. Yes.
Wow.
Tremendous, isn't it? So in and of itself, even for that amazing reason, the organisation, the determination, the amount of women involved, tremendous, remarkable achievement. And for us to have kind of set that aside and not remembered it and not talked about it and not many people have known about it says a lot, really, doesn't it? So a little bit more then about the petition itself, or the appeal itself. This is an example of a paper, and these are now to be seen in the National Library. Because as part of the history of going into this, finding the cover, looking into it and researching, long story short is that the one thing that Calvin Coolidge, the president, did agree to do, because obviously they didn't join the League of Nations, as I said, but he did agree that he would arrange for the appeal to be deposited in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. And that's where it was found, that it was still there in the chest, all of the papers. So lots of negotiations and people involved, but basically the Smithsonian then released the petition last year and came back to Wales, and so is in the National Library along with the original chest, etc.
Could I just ask?
Yes.
Smithsonian, that's a Roman word, isn't it?
The Smithsonian, it's the name of the museum, yes, in Washington.
So
Yeah.
it's a museum.
It's a museum, yeah, it's a very important part. Yeah, I've not been there, but that's where it was deposited. And, you know, it's one of those things, they didn't know they had it kind of thing, they hadn't really realised, you know, the importance of it now. And so many people went out and looked at it and found it. A very important part of this kind of research has been a women's group, actually, in Welsh called Heddwch Nain Mam Gi, kind of translates into Grandmother's Peace. So women got together, lots of them were have been peace campaigners, but people too interested in women's history and so forth, got together and thought, you know, we're going to find out more about this and we're going to not let it go, you know, now that we've heard about it. And they established a branch in the States as well, so a branch, you know, in Wales and in the States. And those women went along to the Smithsonian and talked to the archivists and got it out there and found it in a way. So yeah, each petition kind of appeal paper has kind of 4 pieces of paper to it. The wording of the memorial, or in Welsh as I said, an appeal, we'll look at now, but it's quite significant. That's the kind of chunk of text on the top. And then any woman over the age of 18, but we have found examples of women who were younger than 18, but women over the age of 18 could sign. They should sign their own name, but again we've got examples where we're not sure really, because there's quite a lot of crosses on the papers, which could mean that women didn't actually sign themselves and that's what we're saying for them. But anyway, these are the instructions, and you should sign it only once. We probably have found somewhere women have done more than once. But those are the instructions, and then all the papers would be gathered back, as I said. So, as I said, you know, a few months really, the summer of 1923, and then, you know, taking them over in the February of 1924, at a time when women really couldn't get to sign anything much. You know, women obviously didn't have control of financial affairs usually, most of them didn't have the vote even by that time. So quite extraordinary thing really as well, in terms of cutting edge stuff, I suppose, really, for women to be asked to do this. This was the wording. So, you know, obviously I'm not going to read it out word for word because there's quite a lot of it. But basically it starts by saying, you know, we women of Wales are proud to recall that there is between our little principality and the great country of the United States of America close historical tie in the quest for world peace. And it's interesting really because they're referencing there, I don't know if you've heard of Henry Richard, who was the MP, he was an MP, and has a statue in Tregaron, and he was called the Apostle for Peace, an Apostle Heddwch. And in the previous century then, in the 19th century, he had been trying to set up internationally peace conferences in Paris and Brussels. And he worked with a guy from America to do that, Elihu Burritt. So that's what they're referring to there, is kind of those historical ties of trying to work for world peace. Then they talk about, you know, the United States coming into the war, decided to enter the war and make common sacrifice with us, and the comradeship and so forth. And then they say at the bottom of that first page, we are not actuated by any political motives, we speak simply as the women of Wales, the daughters of a nation whose glory it has been to cherish no hatred towards any land or people, and whose desire is for the coming on earth of the reign of fellowship and goodwill. So what they want is that nations should no longer, as it says, be subject no longer to the verdict of the sword, but to call on the United Nations really to join the Council of the League of Nations. Interestingly, you know, what does peace mean? If I asked you individually, what does it mean then? You know, does it mean just no war? Does it mean, you know, does it mean things like, you know, having a good health system or education or for all? So they do refer to some things about what does peace mean, in the sense they're also referring to the importance of putting an end to the trade, as it says, in women and children. So, you know, something very contemporary, isn't it, for us really, you know, when you think about exploitation and modern day slavery and so forth. So it says, because of course they're talking about those discussions in Geneva with the League of Nations, and at Geneva, in the humanitarian measures to put an end to the detestable traffic in women and children, and also in the maturing of plans for combating the trade in opium and other noxious drugs, which again is a pretty contemporary problem, isn't it, for us? So, you know, they're referencing specific things there. And then basically they make this appeal, which is, we therefore make this appeal to you as the women of the United States with malice towards none, and I think those are Lincoln words, to aid in the effort to hand down to the generations which come after us the proud heritage of a warless world. So that's what women were signing to, and in Welsh, more or less, it reflects that. It's not a word-for-word translation, but those are the principles, and it's about what part can we as women play in this. So that was the wording of the memorial. So as I said, you know, discovering a lost history. That photo there is of many members of Grandmother's Peace, Heddwch Nai Mewn Gi, and that's the chest after it came back to the National Library in April 2023, and that's just a photo from the Temple of Peace, you know, looking at the cover, as I said, that they discovered. So actually Ellen Jones, she's in that group, has been very supportive as the Llywydd, as the President of the Senedd. Mererid Hopwood, who's kneeling down there, she's a Professor of Welsh and Celtic Studies at Aberystwyth University. She and Jenny Mathers, who I don't think is in the photo, she's in the International Politics Department in Aberystwyth. They've actually edited a book which came out about a year ago. It's bilingual, so if you do want to know a lot more about it, The Appeal is called, an appeal, you know, kind of collects together all the research that has been done so far on all of this, so it's fascinating stuff, really. Yeah. So, how do they do this? Well, they basically had county organisers across the whole of Wales, and some of those were men, because some of them were ministers of religion, and of course at that time you couldn't be really a minister of religion as a woman, so they did involve some men, and this is the list for the Ceredigion, or Cardiganshire as it would have been called in those days, of organisers. And as you see, there's not that many names. Aberystwyth's got 2 actually. But then, you know, if you think of an area like this, outside of Aberystwyth and not in, you know, so we've got Tregaron, we've got Lambton, Newquay and Cardigan and Newcastle Emlyn. But, so they would not have been the only people, there would have been other committees as well underneath them. So we've managed to, you know, that list of names has been found, as with the other counties. And also this Welsh Union, the League of Nations, really interesting. They'd gone ahead and established local branches. So there'd be a branch in, I know there was a branch, an active branch in Tregaron, and also in Lampeter. So they had a network. But I'll come to it now, that actually the Women's Institute, which of course was newly established really, wasn't it, in the First World War, they played an important part in this as well as organisations like the Red Cross, of course. And also in Wales, a very important movement for women's involvement was the temperance movement. Very important, where women would have a platform really too for speaking on issues and social issues, etc. Temperance was seeing that, you know, alcohol had caused such havoc in people's lives. So the temperance movement was a big movement in Wales. So they would use those kind of networks, the chapels, the churches, as well as, you know, in communities, obviously, in terms of what was being shared in newspapers and given attention. So people would have been aware of this phenomenon of the appeal going around and organising, really. I mean, I've just picked off one of the organisers in Aberystwyth that we've done a little bit of research into, and she was Kate Lloyd. But you know, on this list, for instance, I think she's just named as well, is she at the bottom there? Miss K.B. Lloyd, Victoria House, Victoria Terrace, Aberystwyth. So that is on the prom, really, the end where Constitution Hill, that end of the prom. And she really was a schoolmistress, and she'd established her own school. She was quite kind of forward in her age by the time of the petition. She was born in 1860, died in 1933. These are just some newspaper clippings I found about her. She'd be teaching boys and girls in her school, and she was active in the town in various kind of spheres. And those are some names that really of achievements of the pupils. And then I found her signature on the petition, because you can scan, and I'll show you, on the National Library website, you can go into the pages of the petition, as well as if you were a reader, you could go and actually order the petition and look at petition. So I found her, there she is. So she's at the bottom there, Kate B. Lloyd, Victoria House, Aberystwyth. So in fairness, she was one of the organisers, but as I said, there would have been literally, tens of women, hundreds of women in the locality going around and collecting the names. So the WI, as I said, was an important network for this, and Catherine Stevens, who's a women's history researcher with the Women's Archive Wales, she's written in the appeal. That's actually a cover of the book I was talking about, which replicates, the cover they found. So that's the book I was talking about. She writes like this, these paragraphs in the book. The effective network of the new WI established in Llanfair, Pwllgwyngyll in 1915 would be of great benefit to the campaign. At least 7 of the 53 Anglesey organisers were associated with this pioneering branch, and in May 1921 the movement's national federation passed a motion urging each branch to study the principles of the League of Nations. And by 1923 there were 145 WI branches in Wales, and its beneficial influence for women was to be widely felt. So they were also, as I said, helping and distributing and collecting signatures. And then there were some important women who were prominent in the movement at that time, like Mary Frances Rathbone. It started in Anglesey, and she was a very prominent person, and she was then part of the executive committee for the petition nationally. So just for you to know, really. And actually in my work with this project over the last year, the Siân Comic, the national organiser, has been a part of the discussions in the committee, which has been really important as well. So I've gone around a few WIs in the area, which has been nice. Well, just so locally, I think I've been to Capel Bangor and Kilkennin, and then down in Drefach, Llanwenog. But nationally as well, my colleague spoke at the national conference in April. So it's kind of reached, because I'm just across this patch really, and then my colleagues in North Wales have gone around quite a bit. So I thought you'd be interested in that. So very briefly, I've just got pictures of some of the papers in Llanafan really, which I know are not easy to read. But as they stand, you can go and look at these on the internet yourself.
How do you search for the?
Well, good question. That's the question. What's been happening is, as part of this project, is that we literally now have hundreds of volunteers who've been involved in transcribing the names, because what I'm showing you there is a photo really, in the sense that the archivists in the National Library photographed each separate page of the petition and then have a catalogue of these pages. So in that method, you can only search for places or names of villages or towns. So if you put in Llanafan, all the reference numbers, because there were 33 boxes, there are 33 boxes, of these petition papers will come up and it says, oh, in box 2 or box 6.
Okay,
Or,
so it's
you know.
findable.
Yes,
Tell them, but
findable.
it's findable.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But then after transcribing, and that's a process that's ongoing now, you'll be able to search for names. So if you had a name of a woman who was, you know, in Wales in that time, a relative or somebody in the village, or then you could search for Mary Jones, whoever it is, and they will come up. So these names, I mean, I think we've got Llanafan as the area in Llanafan to start with. There's Rhosbach, Bryn Glas, Tynewydd, Penrhyw Gelen. So I think these are farms, aren't they? Some of them, at least Eithinbach, Gelli Las. Those are names I can decipher there.
What dates on
That's
this?
what I was just.
Well, this would be
listening to
1923,
I was
yeah,
listening for
in the
name.
summer,
Right.
of 1920, in the autumn of 1923. That's where they were going around and
Because
collecting.
I've got some documents because of
It's Glen Ross. Is that on there? No.
Rhosbach and Bryn Glas and
That's Trisant Roswell.
yeah.
Okay, so I think I need to go on the National Library website. I need to get these
Yes.
and bring them.
You would
Yeah,
enjoy
yeah.
it, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
because
Llanafan.
I'm really
I'll bring
interested to
really interested.
cross-reference them with the names that we've got on lots of legal documents
sure.
about this cottage.
Yes.
And they fascinate me
I
because these
would.
names are there.
Yes.
I
And you
need
could see
to
you
know
would sign there,
whose
wouldn't you?
houses and what they were
And
like.
and
must
also
be some
we've,
ones that are around.
we've
All
got
the old
the
receipts and names,
1921 census.
Yes, that's right.
So that
That's right.
we
That's
could
right.
do a lot of
Lots of comparing
cross-checking.
that.
That would be fascinating.
Yes,
Absolutely.
it would.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a little bit clearer in this photo. So we've got Penrhyw
Oh, it
Gelen,
is.
Pantai Gerion, Glan
Ross, Glen Ross.
Glan Ross. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's
Elizabeth
you.
Howell.
That's my little cottage
Oh,
next
yeah.
door to me. Elizabeth
Howell. Howell.
Oh, is it
Howell.
Elizabeth? Oh, it's one of the
Howell,
Powells.
I say.
Yeah.
Ah.
Howell. Is it Elizabeth
I
Trisant?
think people
Howell,
in this
yeah.
village would
Yeah.
find it
And we've got
fascinating because they're relatives
Panllidiad.
on you.
Yeah.
Pen
We've
Grow
got so many
Working
people
on.
got a house.
Penrhyw.
Yeah.
Is it Caradic?
Yeah. Up the top.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pen Grow Working on. And we've got, so, you know, if you know the area and
Yeah.
can research the women, then you get a great idea, don't you, about routes that they took,
Yes.
possibly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, at times, it's pretty obvious that they've been collected by actually being in a meeting, whether it might have been a chapel service or a meeting of a branch of some kind, because people are signing from different, you know, it doesn't seem logical the way that they,
Yeah.
you know, the signatures appear. We also know that at times they left it in post offices or in shops. So all kinds of stuff now that so interesting to find out about who these women were, who signed, not just those, you know, women in the fur coats, who were the women who signed, and a little bit of their stories really. And as you can imagine, you know, for people who, you know, not from here originally, then it's about, as you say, well, who from my house then might have signed, or a building in the village, or as well as, of course, relatives and people finding their grandmothers and
That's what I
great-grandmothers.
think people here would be really interested
Yes.
if we could connect back
Very
to
much
that.
so. So these are
Is
three
that
more.
Denison, oh,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
actually,
yeah.
Oh, she's been printed. Look.
Yes,
Oh.
three printing.
Edwards, yes.
Yes.
Sarah Edwards. Oh,
There
she
you are.
signed
And Elizabeth
it.
Edwards. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Who's
Yeah.
Twin Printed up?
Queen
That's
Printing.
where we used to live before we
Oh.
moved into the village, yeah, and it was the Edwards.
Oh, Dennis used to live there as well.
Dennis,
was
yeah.
born there.
Dennis would be interested in this.
Yeah.
Literally.
At the bottom there you've got
From
Alban
Printing.
Evans and it says shop Llanafan.
Yeah.
So
From Jill Hickson's
the
place
shop.
up the
Oh, there was an
way.
old wine thing there until it sold off as.
That's interesting, probably.
and I don't know what else we got. Glyn Bwch
Oh,
and Tan Geilan. Tynewydd.
Dolayavan.
Do you know it?
Yeah.
Do you know it?
Do you know that's
Trina's house.
Trina's
Yeah.
house?
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Very
Um,
interesting.
and here we have
Yeah.
some of them from Ystrad Meirig, and you know, because you know it's not, it wasn't just, you know, I'm just showing you
Yeah.
local
Yeah.
examples. They went everywhere really.
Yeah.
But here was from the vicarage, Mary Thomas, Llanafan Vicarage, and Kate Jones. And that's the other thing, it wasn't, you know, in big houses or where there was a maid, you'd have the woman of the house, the lady of the house signing, and the maid. You know, things like that. Going across, you know, social classes and so forth.
Yes, it is, isn't it? I was thinking this is Bron Haylog, or
Right.
Bron Haylog, And
Oh, yeah, just-
this would have been the meeting house at
Yes.
that point. So it would have been the WI
I
at
see.
that point.
Yes.
So it wouldn't have had a family, because I was looking.
Right.
I wonder if the,
Yeah.
and of course it
Right.
wasn't a family living here at that point.
When was this established? Then?
It was 1915.
Oh, well, so it
yes,
was,
one
yeah.
of the very early ones.
Yeah.
And it's been going ever since.
Ah, yes, of course it has. Yeah, of
1980.
course it has.
This one started.
Yeah, well, I don't know, you know, it would be, maybe you could track
I think it would be
the involvement of those early members of the WI if you've got their names, and if they signed. I would imagine they'd have signed.
I think it's a great research project, and I'm
It
sure
is.
it's retired.
There we are.
Mary was did
And then we've got from the area of Gunnos, there's a church, isn't there, or a chapel, Gunnos.
on the hill.
So that's, there we are,
It's just
Penabont. Yeah, Penabont, Pontyclid, Pontyddafod, Glamrose.
Ross twice.
Yeah. Davis, you know, Davis family there. Tinwolch, Railway House. So, there, just share some local examples.
Yeah.
And then your point about cross-referencing, well, what I often do, and I've just found the names here as well, is to cross-reference with the names on the War Memorial, of course, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
And here I think it's in the church.
No, it's just outside
it's
there.
just
Is it
outside
there?
the
Yeah.
church.
Okay,
Yes,
there we
just
are then.
outside the
Yeah.
church,
So I picked off, here we have the signature, and actually as it's just a coincidence, a sad coincidence of course, that we have Kate Owen, where those arrows come, in Pantaronen, and we have Elizabeth Lloyd in Tynant Cottage. And I just looked up the memorials. So here is Isaac Lloyd, and he was the son he was the son of Isaac Lloyd of Talabont, and he was the husband of Elizabeth Lloyd, who signed
Wow.
of Tynant Cottage, Llanafan, and there's a little bit of his history there and his photo, and he was killed in the second battle of Passchendaele on the 10th of November 1917. He was 28, and he's commemorated on the memorial Tyncott in Belgium. So obviously his widow signed the petition, and this is the reality, isn't it? This was the huge motivation, wasn't it, that everybody lost somebody. And similarly, the other signature then on this was Kate Owen, or Catherine Owen. So this is Evan Owen, who was a sergeant in the Royal Garrison Artillery, and he was the son of Vaughan and Jane Owen of Penbont, and the husband of Catherine Owen of Pontaronen. He enlisted in Porth, which is in the Rhondda Valley, and there's lots of connections, of course, with men who were working on agricultural, but also then went down to the mines in South Wales, so there's probably the link there. He was killed in March 1918, and he was 29. So those are just two examples I found. I haven't gone through them systematically, but that again is something that in some communities women's groups have done. They've looked at the war memorial signatures and they've matched them up, you know, because unfortunately even in a small community like this, there's quite a number of names.
That's two young widows.
There we are. Yes, it is. Just
Yeah.
there, really, just for you to see. This is a screenshot of the search page for the Welsh Women's Peace Petition on the National Library. So if you go into the National Library's website and just type in Welsh Women's Peace Petition, this is where you can search for a name, because it's a process. 84,000 of the signatures that have been transcribed have now been put on this, which means you can search for a name. And you can search for the name of a house. So, you know, that will make it easier, won't it? But we're not quite there. Actually, over 300,000 signatures have been transcribed, which is amazing. But it's a process to put them on these pages. So there's that. But there is the whole catalogue also that you can search. And that's the catalogue that you can search with names of places. So you put Llanafan in, and then it'll say, oh, box 2, box 6, and then you have to go back and you look in the box.
So would you
photos.
do that search here on this page?
When I put Llanafan in on this page, I think that was the highlighted name that came up. So I think it was that page with the vicarage.
Yes.
So nothing else came up.
Ah.
So So probably that hasn't been put on yet.
Yes.
So that's why I went in, I got those screenshots from doing the catalogue.
The National Library homepage,
Yes.
catalogue search.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like the more complicated.
Yeah, no, I am familiar with it.
You are?
So,
Okay.
yeah, I'm
I'll,
familiar with it.
yeah, you need to go
Yeah.
to the Welsh Women's Peace Petition pages,
Yeah.
and rather than going to this where you can search for names, you'll see a link that says catalogue records or catalogue,
Yeah.
and you click on that and then you do the search, and then basically you have to go back to the page where the boxes are listed,
Fine.
and then go into the box, go into the page
Yeah.
paper, because what you'll get is a reference for a box number,
Yes.
and then the reference for the actual paper
Mm.
number,
Okay.
and then you can have a look to as you say, follow up on those interests.
Yes.
Could I just ask, this is all done by volunteers, is it?
Yeah, well that's
Because that in
okay.
itself is a labour of love to me.
absolutely.
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 Brilliant.
As this is a screenshot of the page that if you were interested in becoming a transcriber, or those who have become transcribers, because some people, I never really didn't know much about this kind of stuff, but you know there are lots of people who do this and they really enjoy it. So you can do this anywhere. The National Library are running the project. It's called crowdsourcing, that you do a project in that way. But you don't have to go into the National Library to do it. You do it from home, and you register, and you click a button that says start transcribing, and obviously there's guidance and how to do it and so forth. But then you're allocated a petition basically to, as best you can, decipher the word, the name, and the place name, of course, and the address. And of course, as you said, cross-referencing with the 1921 census is really useful, because there's only 2 years in between. So sometimes, but quite often, to be honest, if it's kind of, what's the name of this? The only thing is that the census in kind of put up on Find My Past has a lot of inaccuracies as well, misspellings, especially in Welsh. So you can't really rely on that entirely, but obviously it's helpful. So yes, volunteers, as well as of course a team of staff in the National Library in terms of the actual technical side of running the website and doing the doings. But in terms of, we would never have got this off the ground or so far without those hundreds, literally, of volunteers. And there is a Facebook group that you can join. It is a closed group, but you just need to answer a question. Why are you interested? And so lots of the transcribers belong to this Facebook page. I know not every group, so I know not everybody's on Facebook, but if you were interested, just put in Welsh Women's Peace Petition. You can join the group, you don't have to be a transcriber. And I just took a shot of where they'd reached now. So nearly 320,000 of the signatures have been transcribed, which is fantastic.
What's the full total?
Well, it's 392, isn't it? It's nearly 400,000. We're nearly there. Nearly there. I think that by the time we reach, the aim is that there'll be a big kind of conference, I think, to kind of end all this in May probably of next year. So definitely, I think by that, there's no doubt by that time all of the names will have been transcribed. And actually, this picture here, I'm not going into much of this at all with our time this evening, but it's inspired, as you can imagine. Lots of artwork now. There'll be lots of craft kind of projects with women sewing names on materials and coming together to do that with some local artists, or just coming and doing that themselves and representing it in the community. Yes.
Yeah, because we would only in Llanafan, say we just looked at Llanafan.
Yeah.
We would have only a certain amount of women.
Of course,
and we could do a research project on those women and their losses.
Yes.
And we could bring the community together.
Yes.
Who would be perhaps some of them related,
almost
certainly living in those houses.
Can I just say something? When I was speaking to the woman from the Heritage Lottery,
Yeah.
the one thing she said about, she would love for us to do a little bit about the history of the cottage as part of the project. So that would be amazing.
Yeah, that's
good, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the project existed, the kind of community part, because we did get a lottery grant to kind of go around and give these talks. That side of it has kind of come to an end really. But obviously there's been a lot, as I said, that have been inspired in terms of local groups to come together to either represent all of this, you know, in terms of local terms, as well as any, as I said, any kind of craft or poems. You know, it's inspired an awful lot of things really. And one of the other things that we've done is to just then collect those local stories. So, you know, because we want these women to have their voice, don't we, and to know who they were. And so we've managed now that on the Welsh Centre for International Affairs website to start collecting these stories. And also, I don't know whether you know about People's Collection Wales. It's fantastic really. You know, they've got a website where lots of you know, photographs and historical kind of evidence and testimonies are collected. And so these stories will be transferred and kept on the People's Collection Wales. So, you know, because so really people have been writing a little bit about, well, this is, you know, Mary Jones, and she worked as, you know, and she lived there. And of course, you know, it's so interesting, isn't it? The kind of hardships and the difficulties they faced and survived and overcame. And, you know, and the thing is with these, the women who were involved, it obviously some of them were pacifists.
Yes.
But on the whole, they'd been involved in the war effort and so forth, you know. But it was, of course, a tide that turned, didn't it? And how they, you know, they were to know obviously then that there would be the Second World War, and that's probably a big part of why this history was swept away, wasn't it? But you know, their aspirations and their vision, in fairness, you know, fantastic. So yeah, so we kind of started to bring those hidden histories hopefully a bit more to the fore. So
Could I just ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Get to the rest. Were the people like those the London Welsh? Were those women?
Yeah,
signing?
you're right. That thank you for that. It was throughout Wales, but they also used Welsh networks in those towns and cities.
Yes, definitely.
So we've got signatures from different parts of London through the chapels. You're right, and you know, other places.
Presumably they were represented at that summer's Eisteddfod.
Yeah.
In 2023.
Yeah, well, what it was then, they used the networks, you know, so they asked then that through the chapels in, you know, wherever they were, Leeds, but we've got signatures from Liverpool, lots of signatures obviously from Liverpool, but London, Birmingham, Coventry, Bradford, I think, you know, so where there would have been women congregating in chapels, or there were lots of kind of support networks too for women in service. You know, women who'd gone to serve from Wales, or in the networks, of course, from this kind of area of, you know, the dairies and so forth, and that kind of thing. So yes, so we did. There are those signatures. Haven't found from further afield. So, but it, you know, through Wales and those networks. So just to end really locally, in Llangeitho, nobody really knew about Annie. Interestingly, you know, people of my age. My generation, nobody heard about any of this at all. So some of the things that we've done really is to commemorate obviously these women. So we've now got an information panel outside of the chapel Gwynville, which is on the way into Llangeitho from the north, and because she's buried in the cemetery, she came home, as it were, to be buried after having living in London. And also managed to get her a purple plaque because towards the end of her life, I mean, she died in 1942 during the Second World War. She was living in Aberystwyth. And Maes-Lowry, or Laura Place, which is at the back of at the back of the old college. We got a purple plaque put up last November, actually, a year ago. And actually, her descendants, her grandson, who's the old gentleman holding this image, this painting, he is Roland Ellis, and he is the grandson of Annie.
Is that the son of Hughes Griffiths, is it?
Well, yeah, he's called Roland Ellis. His father was the Tom Ellis, that's right.
Son.
Yeah, a son. Yeah.
Hughes.
Well, she was Hughes Griffiths because, of course, she married that guy, the Peter Hughes Griffiths, as a second husband.
Her grandson was my Welsh teacher in school.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
a connection somewhere.
That's what you get.
Yes.
Okay. Well, kind of knew some of it, right? Can you believe this, isn't it? In a family. That she'd been to America, but that was it.
Yeah.
They didn't know
why.
about the extent of it. They didn't know that she'd achieved,
Unbelievable.
along with all the other women, but that this has been such a thing. So it was a revelation. This is her granddaughter, and she's called Meg Ellis, and she's an author, mainly in Welsh language publications, but also some in English. Meg Ellis, so she's the granddaughter, and then these are her children. So the descendants basically got together, so we put up a purple plaque. So, at least we're kind of starting to get there and get the history out. So we still have an email address because this project is kind of being wound up. But if you had any queries, post starter cards in here. That's free. But otherwise, you can come to me directly. So if you typed in the Welsh Women's Peace Appeal, the WCA is the Welsh Centre for International Affairs. So that's the Temple of Peace and holds all of the records. And there's an awful lot of information on their website. And then, of course, as I said, there's the National Library website. Which again has a bit of the history, but importantly has the petition. So there it is.
Oh, thank you so much.